Are you listening carefully? Good. Otherwise, you might miss something. Something important. Camila knew too much. She always had. She remembered being 3 years old, staring at a man at the grocery store and saying, "He lies when he laughs." Her mother had laughed it off, called her a silly girl. Camila had been right. She'd always been right. By 5, she understood when people were lonely, when they were ashamed, when they wanted to hurt someone. Not through reading lips or watching hands, she felt it. Like their truths were being spoken directly into her blood. The older she got, the quieter she became. 'Cause people didn't like being seen. They liked the mystery. Liked to believe their secrets remained behind their teeth. Camila learned to smile gently, speak softly, never react. If someone cried in front of her, she looked away. If they were cruel, she let them be. She hid it all. Her vision. Her knowing. Instead, she worked in a little shop on the corner of a sleepy street, folding clothes, smiling at tourists, pretending she wasn't seeing the failing marriage behind the customers' laughter, pretending she didn't feel theft in the teenager's pocket before he'd even moved. It was easier this way, to be small, to be unnoticed. But Renee never let her stay that way for long. Renee was warmth wrapped in sunglasses and loud music. The kind of friend who bought 2 ice creams because you'll change your mind. Who called Camila witchy in a loving way. Who never asked questions she didn't already know the answers to. They met in college. Stayed connected ever since. And one day, without warning, Renee showed up at the shop with a plane ticket and sunglasses already on. "You're coming to Hawaii," she said, tossing a tote bag at her. Camila blinked. "I can't afford. Already paid. I can't leave work. Already talked to your manager." "I didn't pack." Renee grinned. "I did. You're so easy to read, Cammy. Come on. For once, let life surprise you." Camila hesitated. Then she looked at Renee, really looked. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel the tension in her ribs. The knowing. The warning. Just light. She smiled. "Okay." The plane landed just before sunset. The air hit Camila like breath from another world. Warm, salted, slow. Not like the city where everything smelled of gasoline and tension. Here, the wind came from the ocean and curled around her like a question. Renee stretched her arms overhead as they stepped off the shuttle. "You feel that? That's freedom, baby." Camila tried to smile. But something in her chest fluttered. Just a tension. They stayed at a bright little bungalow tucked just beyond the palms, close enough to the beach that they could hear waves in their sleep. The walls were painted coral pink, and the sheets smelled like lime. The first 2 days were perfect. They swam in water so clear it looked unreal. They laughed over cocktails. Renee dragged Camila to small markets, to hidden waterfalls, to cafes where every bite tasted like it had never been frozen or rushed. Camila even forgot to read people for a while. She just was. And for the first time in years, that was enough. On the 3rd night, there was a party. Not the tourist kind. This one was deeper, local old music, bonfire set back behind a cluster of rocks, half hidden from the main beach. Renee had a friend of a friend who knew someone who invited them. Camila didn't ask for details. She should have. The moment they stepped onto the sand, something shifted. The fire crackled too low. The wind blew the wrong direction. Camila's skin prickled. Not unpleasantly, but like her blood was remembering something. "I'm gonna dance," Renee said, already pulling off her sandals, twirling toward the music. Camila lingered near the bar. That's where he found her. Tall, quiet, watching. She noticed him before he spoke. There was something heavy in his presence. Not threatening but rooted. Like he had grown from the island itself. "You don't belong here," he said, not unkindly. Camila tilted her head. "You don't mean the party?" "No," he said. "Not this world." His eyes were too knowing. She laughed nervously, brushing her hair behind her ear. "That's dramatic." He leaned closer, voice lower. "You see too much, girl." And then he walked away. Just like that. Camila stood frozen, heart racing. Renee called her from the shore. "Cam 3. Dance with me." But the man was gone. And when Camila turned back to the beach, so was Renee. At first, Camila wasn't afraid. Renee disappeared like that sometimes. Dancing off with strangers, vanishing behind bonfires, chasing stories that ended in laughter and sunrises. She was a hurricane in a bikini, and everyone loved to be swept into her orbit. Camila checked the bar, the rocks, the sand. No Renee, not even her shoes. Just 2 fresh drink glasses left on a driftwood bench, one with lipstick, the other with untouched lime. And a scent in the air. Not perfume, not sweat, burned sugar and seawater. Something shifted in Camila's chest. She closed her eyes and listened. It wasn't hearing. Not really. It was how her blood leaned, how her ribs throbbed, how her skin pulled toward direction like a compass someone had buried in her bones. The sea whispered. Gone. Not dead. Not broken. Just not here. She searched for hours. The party blurred and faded behind her. The fire burned low and out. The music stopped. People drifted away like the tide. Camila kept walking. Her sandals broke. She didn't care. She called Renee's name until her throat hurt. Nothing. No phone signal. No answer. No Renee. Until, at the edge of a narrow path through the brush, she saw it. A flower. Pressed into the sand, too bright for this part of the beach. Not fallen. Placed. A plumeria. Renee's favorite. Camila picked it up with shaking fingers. Something old trembled inside her. This wasn't random. This wasn't just a girl slipping away into the night. This was a message. Back at the bungalow, the light above the mirror flickered once. The towels had been moved, and the plumeria in her hand had wilted by the time she stepped inside. Camila sat on the bed, heart pounding. Morning the sun rose too cheerfully for what had happened. Camila stood outside the bungalow with sand in her hair and dread in her throat. The island felt different. Off-key, like something was playing music just a few notes out of tune. She asked the front desk first. Have you seen my friend? Renee Cole. She came back late last night? The woman behind the counter blinked, then smiled too brightly. I'm sure she's just out exploring. Everyone sleeps in their own way here. Camila tilted her head. She didn't read deception exactly, but she read avoidance. You saw her though? I'm sorry, I don't recall. The woman turned to answer a phone that hadn't rung. Camila walked into town next. A fisherman on the pier. A surfer waxing his board. A boy selling bracelets by the side of the road. They all smiled politely. They all claimed they hadn't seen Renee. One even said, maybe she went home early. Camila's jaw clenched. No, she wouldn't. Another shrug. Another smile. Another wall of vague, breezy friendliness. But none of them looked her in the eyes. None of them said Renee's name, as if it didn't belong here. As if saying it would open something they didn't want to face. She found a police station by afternoon. It was small. Empty. A man inside wore a wrinkled uniform and sunglasses indoors. She told him everything. The party. The beach. The drinks. The disappearance. He nodded slowly. Took notes she didn't believe he'd keep. Tourists go missing all the time, he said. Usually show up 2 days later, red-faced and hungover. You girls party hard. Camila's voice dropped. She didn't just vanish. Someone knows something. His face didn't change, but something in his posture did. He leaned back in the chair. Let me give you some advice, miss. You're not from here. You don't understand here. Some places are meant to be enjoyed, not questioned. Camila stood. Thank you for nothing, she said, voice like ice. He didn't stop her from leaving. But when she glanced back, he was watching her, expressionless. That night, Camila locked every window, sat on the edge of the bed, holding the wilted plumeria in her palm, and whispered Renee's name, out loud, intentionally, because someone had to, and because if no one else was going to look for her, Camila would walk into the island's mouth alone. Camila returned to the beach at dusk. She didn't know what she was looking for. Footprints, maybe. Clothing. Another flower. A whisper. She wasn't even sure she believed in signs, but when everything feels wrong, you chase what little feels right. She wore dark clothes. No jewelry. Hair tied back. She didn't want to be seen. The tide was lower than before. The sand cooler. The air quieter. Too quiet. She followed the shoreline to where the party had been. The fire pit was gone. No embers. No bottles. No footprints. as if it had never happened. But she remembered. The music. The dancing. The man at the bar. The man who told her, "You don't belong here." She looked to the trees. A narrow path between palms and brush. The place the plumeria had been left. Her gut twisted. She stepped off the sand. The forest wasn't loud, but it listened. Branches arched just enough to let her pass. Leaves shifted without wind. The deeper she walked, the more the air changed, thicker, damp with earth and time. Camila moved slowly. Her skin buzzed. Not with fear. With knowing. She was being followed. She stopped, turned, and saw no one. But the brush behind her twitched. "Renee?" she called. Her voice sounded too small in the green. No answer. She walked faster. Then a whisper. Not from ahead. Not from behind. From below. It wasn't words. Not in English. But she understood. "You shouldn't be here." She froze. And then someone grabbed her wrist. She spun, wrenching away, raising her arm to strike, but stopped. It was the man from the bar. Closer now. Eyes dark. Shirt wet with sea spray or sweat. He looked angry. Not at her. At something around her. "I told you not to dig," he hissed. "They don't like to be seen." "Who are they?" He shook his head. "You're being watched, girl." "I don't care." "You should." She stepped back, narrowing her eyes. "What happened to my friend?" His expression shifted, just a flicker. He knew. She stepped forward, heart pounding. "You know, don't you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he reached into a satchel at his hip and pulled out something small, a dried flower bundle tied with black string. He pressed it into her hand. "Go inland," he said. "Look for the smoke that doesn't rise." What does that mean? But he was already turning, disappearing into the trees like a memory. Camila looked down at the bundle. Inside, tucked between the herbs, a second plumeria. Fresh. Camila hiked inland the next morning. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Not that there was anyone left to tell. She carried the herb bundle in her pocket, hidden deep. Her phone had no service. Her sandals were wrong for the terrain. But something in her feet knew where to walk, even if her mind didn't. The island's spine rose around her, dense green breathing. Time stopped inside the canopy. It felt like she had left the present and entered a place with no clocks. She followed no trail. She followed feeling. And then she saw it. A small line of smoke in the distance, barely visible. It didn't curl up. It curled sideways, dragged by no wind, slipping through trees like a shy animal. The smoke that doesn't rise. She followed. It took hours. Branches scratched her arms. Her throat was dry. Her legs burned. But finally she came to a clearing. Not wide. Not open. But still. And in the middle of it, a small wooden structure barely standing. Not a hut. Not a house. A shrine, maybe? There were carvings in the wood, symbols she didn't understand. They looked like bones turned into language. The smoke came from a fire pit outside. 3 people sat around it. Old. Watching. Camila's breath caught. They were not surprised to see her. One of them, a woman whose skin looked carved from volcanic stone, nodded once and gestured for her to sit. Camila stepped forward, heart beating louder than the birds. "Who are you?" she asked softly. The woman didn't answer. Instead, she reached for a wooden bowl beside her and poured steaming tea into a chipped cup. She held it out. Camila hesitated. But the plumeria had led her here. And her gut didn't scream danger. It whispered truth. She took the cup. Drank. The taste was bitter. Smoky. Familiar in a way she couldn't name. Her fingers tingled. Her breath slowed. The forest faded. And in its place, memory. But not hers. She saw Renee. Laughing. Dancing barefoot beneath a different moon. Then, running. Crying. Hands reaching for her in the dark. And finally Renee, kneeling before a man in white robes, whispering. "She doesn't know what she is. Please let her go." Then everything went black. Camila jolted upright, gasping. The old woman leaned forward. "You are not just a girl who sees," she said. "You are a key." Camila's lips trembled. "Where's Renee?" The woman's face was full of sorrow. "She tried to protect you from what's hunting. But protection has a price." Camila's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She sat by the fire, steam still curling from her teacup like a ghost. The 3 old shamans hadn't moved since the vision passed, as if frozen in their own knowing. The woman finally spoke again. Her voice was quiet. Ancient, your friend offered herself in your place. She spoke your name with love. That is why you are still breathing. Camila's voice cracked. In my place? For what? The old man to her left, blind in one eye and covered in ink symbols, answered. For Tehai Kahua, the one who collects. The name hung in the clearing like smoke from a cursed fire. Camila's stomach dropped. What is that? The third, neither man nor woman, a presence that felt like stone and ocean combined, finally spoke. He is a priest of the forgotten blood, a keeper of the old cult. Renee's family serves him still. Camila's heart stopped. No, that's not possible. Renee, she hated cults, conspiracies, all of it. She was normal. The woman shook her head. She loved you. That part was true. But the rest? She was born into something older than she could ever explain. The Cole family once fed seers to the roots of the island, believing that such souls keep the land awake. They call it tradition. We call it hunger. Camila felt the world tilt beneath her. My soul? You see, the old man said, tapping his temple. But not just with your eyes. You were born open. And they have been looking for one like you for a long time. Tears blurred her vision. So they sent Renee to what? Lure me here. No, the woman said gently. Renee came to warn you. But the others followed. Camila clenched her fists. And now she's gone. She chose to be gone, the third whispered. She bought you time. Camila stood. Her voice was hollow. Then I'm done running. I'm going to get her back. The three looked at each other. You cannot bring the dead back, the woman said. Camila shook her head. The blind man reached into the coals and pulled something out barehanded. An obsidian talisman, sharp-edged, pulsing faintly. Take this, he said. And don't let it touch your skin. Why not? Because it remembers blood. And it's thirsty. As Camila stepped away from the clearing, the trees whispered her name over and over again. Camila emerged from the forest just after sunrise. Her feet were blistered. Her throat dry. The obsidian talisman pulsed faintly in the cloth pouch tied around her neck, never once touching her skin. It radiated cold and something else, remembrance. The island looked the same, but now she knew better. Beneath every wave, behind every tree, under every stone, something watched. She reached the beach. The tide was out. Shells littered the sand like teeth. She didn't know why she came back here, only that the knowing had led her again. And it was right, because something was waiting at the water's edge. At first she thought it was driftwood, then cloth, then a dress. Renee's dress, the one she'd worn the night she disappeared. Soft red silk torn at the hem, soaked in salt. Camila dropped to her knees. Beside it, carved into the wet sand with unnatural precision. Camila. Below that, a single question. Do you see us now? She stared at the words until the tide washed them away. But the dress remained. She carried it back to the bungalow in silence. Every person she passed looked away. Conversations stopped when she neared. One man crossed himself. A child whispered to her mother and pointed, but the mother pulled the girl away without a word. Camila's world was turning inside out, but the edges had never really been stable. She just hadn't seen it all until now. That night, she hung Renee's dress by the window and lit every candle she could find. She didn't cry. She couldn't. She sat on the floor with her back against the wall and whispered, I see you. And from somewhere far off, maybe from the forest, maybe from the sea, something whispered back, then come deeper. The talisman led her. Not with light, not with sound, but with pressure. When she stepped too far from the right path, the cold deepened. When she moved closer, it warmed with a sharpness, like a knife beneath her collarbone. She followed it up the winding slope of a forgotten trail carved into the side of an ancient hill, one that locals called the Sleeping Jaw. Tourists didn't come here. No signs. No photos on travel blogs. And that was the point. At the top was a gate. Not modern. Not even old in the way people mean it. This gate had no hinges. No wood. No handles. Just stone. Carved with faces she didn't recognize but recognized her. As she approached, one of the faces cracked open. A mouth. She almost dropped the talisman. But the wind rushed through it and carried a single word to her ears. Enter. The tunnel beneath the mountain was colder than any forest had been. Camila lit a match. It lasted only seconds but long enough to see. The walls were carved with eyes. Hundreds. Thousands. Some open. Some closed. Some weeping. The path sloped downward into the belly of the island. She descended for what felt like hours. No time. No sound. Just her breath. Her heartbeat. And the growing sensation that she wasn't alone. Then light. Faint. Flickering. Torchlight. She pressed forward around the bend and saw them. Robe-wrapped figures. All seated in a circle, heads bowed. At the center, a stone basin filled with water so dark it reflected nothing. And on the other side of it, him. Tehai Kahua. Not a monster. Not what she expected. A man. Young. Perfect. Too perfect. Like something pretending to be human. His eyes opened when she entered. Black to the center. You came, he said, smiling softly. Camila didn't speak. He nodded toward the basin. Drink and see what she gave. Camila didn't move. I already know. You know what she did, but not what she saw. And that is the last thing she left behind. Camila's fingers twitched toward the talisman. He noticed. His smile faltered. You brought that here? Camila lifted it out. Wrapped in cloth still but pulsing. His followers stirred, whispering in tongues. Tehai Kahua stood. You brought memory into the chamber of forgetting. Camila took a step forward. Renee died to protect me. He nodded. And now she lives inside what you carry. Camila's stomach dropped. What? He smiled again. Darker now. Colder. She gave her sight to you, Camila. All of it. The gift. The burden. The key. His voice dropped to a whisper. And now you are not just someone who sees. He stepped closer. You are someone who remembers. Camila ran. She didn't wait for the basin to shimmer. Didn't listen to Tehai Kahua's final words. Didn't dare speak. Because something shifted the moment he said it. She gave her sight to you. She felt it now. Like a flood behind her ribs. Like light trying to escape through the cracks in her bones. Her head throbbed. Her eyes burned. The tunnel walls whispered in the language of eyes. Of watching. Of witness. And the talisman? It pulsed in her palm like a second heart. She burst out of the tunnel into nightfall. The stars felt too close. The sky too heavy. She stumbled down the hill, half blind with whatever was building inside her. Images blinked through her vision, some hers, some not. Renee's laughter. A child's scream. A fire. A ritual. A hand reaching into the dark. Camila dropped to her knees in the grass, clutching her chest. And the first memory spoke. It wasn't a voice. It was a moment. She saw Renee days before the trip, kneeling beside a sea-worn altar, hands shaking. She'll be with me, Renee whispered. She won't understand, but she'll feel safe. Then, I'll offer myself. You'll leave her alone. And then Camila saw something that broke her. Renee crying. Camila gasped, blinking it away. The memory faded, but the ache stayed. She was crying now. Real tears. Real grief. The kind that hollowed out your stomach and replaced it with truth. She staggered to her feet and found herself not alone. The man from the bar. Again. Waiting. You saw it, didn't you? He asked. She nodded. You knew all along. I wasn't allowed to interfere. But you gave me the bundle. He hesitated. And then, I was Renee's brother. Camila froze. What? She didn't know. I was hidden from her. One of the few who escaped the family's vow. My name is Malu. She could barely breathe. She gave everything, he said, voice raw. But she couldn't give you what you'll need next. Camila looked up at him. What do I need? He reached into his pocket, pulled out a long, slender object wrapped in silk. When she unwrapped it, it was a blade, carved from obsidian, marked with the same symbol that was burned into the talisman. Malu met her eyes. You need to finish what she started. Camila didn't sleep. She couldn't. Not with the obsidian blade under her pillow. Not with the talisman pulsing beside her skin. Not with Renee's memories whispering to her every time she closed her eyes. By morning she'd seen 12 visions. Some were fragments. Others were warnings. One showed Renee being taken, blindfolded, bound but unbroken. One showed Camila at birth, her eyes wide and silent as her mother wept and whispered, "She knows too much already." And one showed a circle of robed figures, chanting her name before she ever stepped foot on the island. They had waited for her. Malu found her by the shoreline. He had been silent most of the night, watching her from the window like a sentinel. He hadn't asked questions. He hadn't tried to comfort her. But now he said only, "They know you're awake." Camila turned to him, skin pale, hands trembling. "They're coming, aren't they?" He nodded. "You carry her vision now, and they can feel it." A silence passed between them. Then Camila whispered, "I feel it too." The trees groaned that afternoon. The sky turned green gold. Clouds too low. And then they came. 3 of the cult sentinels, robed in the color of grave soil, stepped out from the jungle, their faces blank, their movements too smooth. They didn't run. They walked. But the land folded for them. Leaves browned under their steps. Animals scattered before they even appeared. Camila turned to Malu. "We run." He nodded. "Toward the cliffs. Toward the place the sea can't swallow." They ran. The jungle was alive now. Branches grabbed for her shirt. Roots tried to twist beneath her feet. The air was full of whispers. Voices not her own, not Renee's, not even the island's. But Camila understood them all. The vision inside her had cracked something open. She was hearing the island's memory. Every footstep on the soil. Every body buried in its depths. She felt them. And when one of the sentinels got too close, arms outstretched, mouth open in some silent chant, Camila didn't hesitate. She drew the obsidian blade. And the ground answered. The roots rose. The trees bent. The sentinel vanished. Swallowed into the earth like a seed. Malu stopped running. He stared at her. What did you just do?" Camila was shaking. "I didn't do anything," she whispered. "The island did." And for the first time she realized something terrible. The cult hadn't just waited for her. They had shaped the island to be hers. All along. The cliffs were not on any map. Malu led her without speaking, his breath shallow, his eyes scanning the treetops. The last sentinel hadn't followed. But the jungle silence was worse than pursuit. It meant the island was waiting. Camila gripped the obsidian blade tighter. The talisman pulsed steadily in time with her heart. They reached the top by dusk. The ocean stretched below like a vast, dark truth. The wind snapped sharp against her cheeks. Salt in the air. Mist rising. And behind her, the trees stopped like they feared what lay ahead. And the stone was a circle. Ancient. Carved with symbols she now understood without knowing how. Malu gestured to the center. "This is where they want you to stand." Camila stepped to the edge of the circle. "And what happens if I do?" "They'll take the gift back," he said quietly. "The visions. The knowing. The memories that don't belong to you." She looked at him. "But they'll kill me." "No," he said. "Worse. They'll keep you. Feed from what you see. Turn you into a mirror. A tool. Forever." Camila clenched her fists. "They want to trap what Renee gave me." "Yes. Her sacrifice. Her love. The UR power, it threatens their control." She turned slowly to face the sea. "And if I don't give it up?" He didn't answer. Because they both knew the answer. Then, a sound behind them. Footsteps. Camila turned. And there he was. Tehai Kahua. Alone. But more dangerous than an army. He was no longer pretending to be human. His skin flickered like something beneath it was trying to climb out. He looked at her with reverence. "You see now, don't you?" he said. Camila didn't reply. "You're the last key. The one who remembers. The one who knows. If you stay like this, our lineage dies. We fade. Our purpose lost." Camila's voice was quiet. "You mean your control?" He smiled. "Isn't that the same?" Malu stepped between them. Tehai Kahua didn't look away from her. "You can give it to me freely," he said. "And your friend's sacrifice will mean something. Or you can keep it and waste what she gave." Camila's breath hitched. And then she said, "No." The sky cracked. Lightning without thunder. The air turned heavy. The sea rose. Tehai Kahua snarled and changed. His body stretched. His mouth opened too wide. A shape that had worn skin like clothing peeled through the illusion. Malu raised his knife. Camila raised the blade. But this wasn't just about blades. It was about memory. She gripped the talisman and screamed Renee's name into the wind. And the island answered. Roots split the stone. The sea roared up the cliffside. And Tehai Kahua was no longer smiling. The sky had no stars. Just wind, salt, and pressure, like something vast was leaning too close to the earth. Camila stood inside the circle, hair whipped around her face, talisman burning against her chest. Tehai Kahua no longer looked like a man. His body shimmered with fractures, jagged light pulsing through his skin, as if his form was held together by ritual alone. He was the shape of a curse wearing a name. And he was afraid. Because she hadn't broken. The island had opened. And now it was asking. A voice that wasn't a voice whispered from the sea, the sky, the ground beneath her feet. What will you give, child of sight? She gripped the obsidian blade. The talisman screamed against her skin. They wanted her knowing. Her gift. Everything Renee had died to preserve. But she would not let them take it. She looked at the blade. A memory stirred. Renee's hands. Blood in her palms. A quiet promise, let it in with me. Camila breathed in. And cut her palm. The blood hit like flame. The sky cracked wide open. Tehai Kahua roared. Not in pain. In rage. Because it wasn't a sacrifice. Camila had chosen not to give the vision away. But to anchor it. To make it hers. Her blood had claimed the circle. And the circle remembered every woman before her. It closed around her like light. Tehai Kahua lunged. And the earth opened beneath him. Roots shot upward, wrapping around him, pulling him backward into the soil from which his cult had grown. He screamed as he was taken. Not into death, but into forgetting. The last thing Camila saw before the light swallowed everything was Renee, standing just outside the circle, smiling, mouth moving. I knew you'd choose right. Camila collapsed, and the wind finally went still. Camila woke in a bed she didn't recognize. White sheets, wooden walls, ocean air drifting through the open windows. She sat up slowly, her hand bandaged. The talisman gone. Malu sat in the chair across from her, arms crossed, jaw tight. You passed out, he said. The island let you live. Camila blinked. He's gone. Malu nodded. Tehai Kahua's form is broken, buried beneath the roots he once fed. She breathed in deep, but there was something still coiled in the back of her mind. Renee. She was there, Camila whispered. At the end, I saw her. Malu looked down. She was always going to be there. Even when she knew what her family was. Camila's stomach dropped. Tell me. He hesitated. But then he told her everything. The Cole family had been part of the cult for generations. They'd founded the first offshore temples. They'd built rituals into bloodlines, binding daughters to the island through false friendships, arranged love, hidden marriages. They weren't just in the cult. They had helped create it. Camila's hands trembled. And Renee. She was raised into it. Taught to lure seers. Guide them. Bring them to Tehai Kahua. No. But she didn't follow the vow, Malu said softly. She broke it the moment she met you. Camila's breath caught. Why? He looked at her with quiet eyes. Because she saw you and chose you. She was supposed to hand me over, Camila whispered, eyes wet. Yes. And she gave her life instead. Yes. Camila stood, dizzy with the weight of it. Renee had never been her shadow. She had been her shield. Not just a friend. A soul who had rewritten her bloodline for love. That night, Camila walked the shoreline alone. The sea was quiet. The wind gentle. She whispered Renee's name into the tide, and the wave kissed her feet like an answer. But peace didn't settle in her chest. Because something else was blooming now. Memory. Power. And a hunger to protect others who might walk the same road. Camila left the island 1 week later. No announcement. No return flight plans. Just a backpack, a quiet goodbye to Malu, and the sea air braided into her hair like a spell. No one stopped her. Not because they couldn't. Because they knew. The cult had broken. Without Tehai Kahua, without a Cole to serve as bridge, the spine of the old magic had snapped. The rituals collapsed. The silences scattered. The forest had stopped whispering. And the sentinels, those strange half-born things, fled to wherever forgotten beliefs go to die. But the island still remembered. And so did Camila. She didn't return to her old life. She couldn't. The girl who folded sweaters and hid from knowing was gone. In her place was someone watched by memory, carried by vision, and cradled by sacrifice. Renee's laughter still lived in her ribs. Sometimes when she turned corners too fast, she swore she saw her. Barefoot. Spinning in red silk. Smiling, Camila kept the obsidian blade. She never used it again. She didn't need to, but she kept it wrapped in silk and sage, tucked in her drawer, next to the plumeria she had pressed between pages of a book she could no longer read. The talisman she buried at the base of an old tree in the center of a nowhere forest, so it could whisper to the earth instead of her. Sometimes when the wind was just right, the tree hummed. And Camila would smile, because she knew she wasn't alone. Years later, a stranger would come to her door. Eyes too wide, voice too quiet. "I think I see things I'm not supposed to," the girl would whisper. Camila would nod, open the door, pour the tea, and say, "Then let's begin."